Well, get ready for a trade war because at midnight tonight, everything will change for North American trade. Business as we know it will be altered because the president has announced plans to put tariffs on Canada, Mexico, and China. Now, missing from this conversation is how China will respond, and that's a big piece of it. We're going to flesh that out more. But in the last few hours, the president of Mexico has had a conversation with Donald Trump and said, we will work with you now. So here is the president's announcement of that deal, saying that he spoke with the president of Mexico and they made a deal that Mexican soldiers, 10,000 of them, will go to the border and work their side. Basically, what he wanted was the stop of flow of fentanyl, which has created a humongous crisis inside the United States. But Mexico gets something from it too. In fact, not reported in the president's tweet, but reported by the New York Post, is that the United States will work with Mexico to prevent trafficking of weapons into America's southern border. So the stopping of contraband will go both ways. Obviously, the Mexican people should feel a little bit safer, although everything in Mexico is run from the cartel, so we can't help Mexico to feel safe. But not only will drugs stop coming north of the border, but our president is saying we will stop weapons and guns from going south. So this is what we call the art of the deal. As we speak, he's speaking to Justin Trudeau. Will we get a similar agreement out of that? We don't know. And we're still waiting to know whether or not China will respond as well.
Well, let's bring in E.J. Antoni. He's the research fellow at the Grover M. Herman Center for the Federal Budget and the Heritage Foundation. He's an economist, a well-known economist who's been diving deep into all of this. E.J., welcome to the show. Good to see you. This is a fluid situation, obviously, over the past few hours, this deal with Mexico. What's going to happen with, as Kevin O'Leary calls Trudeau, King Idiot, Trudeau up in Canada, what's going to happen there? And then we'll get to China. But just first, where do you think things sit right now with the United States and Canada on these tariffs?
I think we're in an absolutely phenomenal position, quite frankly. Trump at this point really holds all the cards, and I think he knows it too. And increasingly, people like Trudeau are beginning to realize that as well. Trade wars, much like all wars, are kind of a laboratory of sorts where we find out who is weak and who is strong. Now, what's happening right now in the initial shots of this war, I guess you could say, is that people are beginning to wake up that Trump is not kidding. He's not playing around. He is deadly serious about this. And so that's making people like Trudeau reevaluate their position personally and nationally as well. Again, as that increasingly happens, I think you're going to continue to see these nations bend the knee. We've seen that with Panama. My goodness, Marco Rubio goes down there and literally in a matter of hours, they're booting out the Chinese Communist Party. Mexico is already bending the knee as well. Again, I think it's only a matter of time before Canada follow suit. So the United States, I really want to emphasize, is in a tremendously strong negotiating position right now. In terms of what are we looking at for cost increases on consumers? Again, I don't think there's much cause for concern here. I think Americans have a tremendous amount of strength. And the reason for that is because we have a tremendous number of alternatives. We don't have to buy Canadian lumber. We don't have to buy Canadian energy. And were it not for all of the subsidies that these nations put in place to protect their own industries and the tariffs that they put in place to also protect their own industries, were it not for those things, then we wouldn't even be having this conversation to begin with. And so, again, American consumers can do without these foreign imports pretty easily. And that's part of the reason why Trump, again, is holding all the cards here.
Well, economists that I follow have said that the Walmart China Amazon effect has kept us from properly recovering from 2008 because it has artificially kept prices low. So would there be some kind of pain point where we actually have to adjust our consumer spending? It's not just my daughter can't spend on Temu or I can't buy dumb birthday tchotchke on Amazon through China. Is there more to it?
Oh, there's certainly a lot more going on here. And I think one of the things that a lot of those economists miss in those analyses is the fact that they don't pay attention to things like the currency manipulation that's going on in countries like China, where they are purposely devaluing the Chinese renminbi. We usually call it the Chinese yuan. They're purposely devaluing that relative to the dollar in order to give essentially an artificial boost to their exporters. The other effect that has is the fact that people who are essentially accepting that Chinese currency here in the United States end up taking an absolute bath, because the longer they hold that currency before turning around and buying something back from China, the more value they lose as that currency depreciates. And so that's just one of the ways in which the trade that we have with China does not give America anywhere near the value that we oftentimes think it does. So when you look at factors like that currency manipulation, when you look at the subsidies that happen in Chinese industry, how the Chinese Communist Party has essentially created those subsidies through a complete vertical supply chain, and then also how China circumnavigates tariffs and they essentially abuse agreements like the USMCA, the United States, Mexico, Canada Free Trade Agreement. What they essentially do is things like take goods from China that should be receiving a tariff, but first import them to Mexico or Canada, repackage them. Sometimes they do final assembly work, whatever the case may be. They are more or less abusing the rules in order to not only get rid of the tariffs, but also to get a more than usual favorable trade stance or a trade position for themselves. Again, they're using nations like Canada and like Mexico as a go-between, and they're abusing rules that were put in place for an entirely different purpose.
I want to put this up here on the screen here. I don't know if you'll be able to see it, EJ, but this is a map of the Canadian oil route here. And it's pretty fascinating because there's been so much talk about energy disruption in the United States, what would happen. Well, if you notice that on the right side of your screen is a thing called Energy East, which was a pipeline that was meant to deliver oil from the western part of Canada to the eastern part of Canada. That's been canceled. And the way that oil moves through Canada into the eastern part of that country is through the United States. It goes through the northern part of the United States, in addition to which refining oil has to happen in the United States because the refinery capacity isn't there in Canada. So there's been a lot of talk about energy in all of this. I mean, it seems to me that you're right. We seem to be holding the oil cards here as it relates to Canada. Am I wrong?
Oh, no, that's 100% right. We're also holding all the cards when it comes to natural gas as well. We forget that the Canadian oil industry really has never developed the way it has here in the United States. And so they may have a lot of the raw material, but they don't have, as you pointed out, the refining capacity. They don't have the infrastructure. They don't have a lot of the capabilities to bring product to market. And so would it hurt American refiners, for example, if we had tariffs put in place by Canada? Absolutely, it would, except it would have a pretty minimal impact on those refiners because the Canadian consumer is so incredibly dependent upon the product of American refiners and American refiners exclusively. I've seen, for example, I've heard some numbers thrown around for how high would oil have to go before it would be worth it for Canadian exporters to send that oil somewhere other than the United States to have it refined and brought back to Canada in the form of finished products like gasoline. And the cost would have to get somewhere north of $150 a barrel before it would even resemble profitability. And even at that point, you're just looking at essentially break-even costs. So it is just so much cheaper to send the oil here via pipeline on a relatively short distance than to ship it across, halfway across the world on a tanker and then back again. And so, once again, it's a good example of how our nation's economies are pretty tightly linked. But if you want to talk about who needs who more, if you want to talk about who would lose more in a trade war, the answer, again, is very clear that the deck is stacked in the favor of the United States. And we should point out that, much like in all wars, there are no winners in trade wars, right? Everyone loses, but not everyone loses to the same extent. And so if the United States and Canada really want to go toe to toe and get into not just a cold trade war, but a hot trade war, then absolutely Canada is going to come out the biggest loser.
Now, something we've spoken out against on this show several times is what we call sanctions of mass destruction. When the Obama administration put sanctions on Syria and Iran, and young people, children they die because they can't get antibiotics. So there are innocent victims that have nothing to do with politics. Whereas President Trump's way to do business. His leverage is tariffs, not sanctions. Can you make, even though it's a complicated question, can you make that distinction? And is there something maybe that we're missing, that some innocent people could be hurt by this in a way that we haven't thought about? Is there something there?
Well, again, trade wars, like any wars, are always going to have essentially you're going to have collateral damage, right? You're going to have innocent people, as so far as any of us are innocent. You're going to have innocent people be harmed. That's absolutely true. But it's just a question of what is the end goal here, right? Obviously, our goal is not to harm any individual person, right? That's not what we're about. What we're about is getting a better deal for the American people. And what we're about is helping the American dairy farmer, the American factory worker, who right now is frankly getting hosed by Canadian tariffs, by Canadian non-tariff barriers, who, those things are essentially preventing our dairy farmers from selling more product in Canada. They're preventing the guy working on a factory line assembling cars. They're preventing his product from being sold in Canada. And if we want to talk about Mexico, my goodness, how many families need to lose loved ones to the fentanyl that Mexico is allowing to pour across their open border? And so, look, is there going to be some negative fallout from a potential trade war? Absolutely. Of course there is. But what's the alternative? The alternative is to allow a much worse status quo to continue. Thomas Sowell, one of the greatest economists ever, has often said, life does not ask you what you want. Life presents you with options. And so we choose the best of the options that we have. And in this case, that's to go toe to toe with these nations. And if they want a trade war, so be it. We'll win in the end.
Right.
Winning hearts with the Thomas Sowell quote. I got Natalie a Thomas Sowell poster for her office for Christmas.
And a sweatshirt.
And a sweatshirt.
I have the collection.
EJ, great to see you today. We really appreciate you. Obviously, this is a fluid situation. Mexico backing down on that, on the tariffs there. We're watching what's happening with Trudeau in Canada, and we're going to see in this conversation what happens with China. Great to see you, EJ and Tony. Thank you so much for joining us today. We appreciate it.
Thank you.
My pleasure. Thank you for having me.
Now that Fauci has been pardoned, RFK is going to unearth what most of us already knew about the pandemic. Sad that this effort won't help the tens of millions who have never felt the same after getting the virus or the mRNA shots. We all know someone with a personal story. Pfizer has been forced to release a detailed list of side effects associated with its shots. Sadly, some of these issues like myocarditis, blood clots, are creeping up on people in a blink, causing debilitating issues. We've talked to, military whistleblowers who are kicked out of the military as a result of not taking these things, but also people who have now had life-altering issues as a result of it. So a less severe but common concern is what's known as long COVID syndrome, a condition that leaves people feeling brain fog, chronic fatigue, shortness of breath, lingering for months, in some cases years. Well, our friends at the Wellness Company make it easy for you with their new long COVID syndrome support. You get 4 doctor-formulated neuroceuticals with 5 to 8 plants and minerals in each bottle designed to address the root causes. The ultimate spike detox, mind lift, elevated energy, and the healthy heart. Dr. Peter McCullough recommends a durable recovery through holistic health. Explore targeted solutions like long COVID support. Right now, you can save $40 on the bundle and get an additional $23 off plus free shipping. Head over to twc.health/redacted. Use the code redacted to take action today for a healthier tomorrow. Well, the U.S. Agency for International Development, USAID, which is a front, of course, for the CIA, has been effectively shut down now following an announcement by Elon Musk that President Donald Trump agreed to close the agency. And just this morning, you can see all of the kerfluffle outside there. I love they're saying USAID saves lives, which is hilarious to me when you think about the regime change operations around the world and how many people have died. How about the
they're just deciding whose lives they carry.
How about the million Ukrainians who've died at their hands as a result of the regime change there? So these protests are additionally more than 600 employees reported being locked out of the agency's computer systems today. The doors basically shuttered. You can see Democrats holding a press conference there. They have a larger budget than the CIA. They're responsible for regime change operations around the world, like in Ukraine in 2014. They were given $5 billion of your tax dollars to carry out a coup in Ukraine, of course, led by Victoria Nuland. President Trump was on the tarmac and he said, USAID is run by lunatics.
USAID, or going on there?
Well, it's been run by a bunch of radical lunatics, and we're getting them out. USAID, run by radical lunatics, and we're getting them out, and then we'll make a decision.
So Jamie Raskin, among other Democrats, were there at this little protest today to basically call Donald Trump a dictator and how we have to save USAID. Watch.
Elon Musk, you didn't create USAID. The United States Congress did for the American people. And just like Elon Musk did not create USAID, he doesn't have the power to destroy it. And who's going to stop him? We are. We're going to stop him.
Never mind the fact that JFK signed an executive order creating USAID, so it wasn't Congress, but don't let facts get in the way. Here's Ilhan Omar, who also had something to say about the Trump dictatorship. Listen.
We are witnessing a constitutional crisis. We talked about Trump wanting to be a dictator on day one, and here we are. This is what the beginning of dictatorship looks like. When you gut the Constitution and you install yourself as the sole power, that is how dictators are made.
Wow, it's almost like they're probably making a lot of money from USAID, that they would get out in the cold weather and give a speech like that. They must be making some money. Let's ask Peter Schweitzer, president of the Governmental Accountability Institute, the author of like 100 books. Excellent books, by the way. Here's one, Secret Empires. Here's another one, Extortion, how politicians extract your money, buy votes, line their own pockets. And Peter, I think I interviewed you a number of years ago when your book on Clinton cash came out, and it's unbelievable to see how the Clinton Foundation tied to USAID, all these Democrats out there in the cold complaining and crying about it. It all kind of comes together, doesn't it, Peter? Good to see you again.
Great to see you guys, too. Thanks for having me, Leland. No, you're right. I mean, the Clintons are an example of how the political class has enriched themselves through USAID, but they are hardly the only example. And that's the problem. It's really twofold. Number one, there are certainly things that USAID has done. You talked about Ukraine that are very troublesome. But it used to be that USAID was supposed to be an extension that protected American interests. Under Barack Obama, that changed. It then became the focus of advancing the so-called millennial goals that had been established. So it no longer became about projecting American power, American influence. It became about, affecting climate change and affecting migration. So it's totally went off of its original Cold War mission. The second problem is the one you alluded to specifically, which is a lot of the money does not go to help poor people overseas. It goes to consultancies in places like Arlington, Virginia, or Bethesda, Maryland, that are run by former politicians that rake in cash doing, quote unquote, consulting work on development in these countries. With the Clintons, it happened in Haiti. With the Bidens, certainly Burisma, that corrupt energy company that Hunter Biden was involved in, they were getting support from USAID. So this is an enrichment program, not for poor people in the developing world, but for the Beltway political class.
Now, most of this is run through the State Department in the same way they use the National Endowment for Democracy to decide. And the guise of it is that other countries are so backwards, they don't know how to be a democracy. They don't know how to be progressive when it comes to women's rights and gay rights. And they need us to go and teach them this, which is an incredibly ethnocentric and arrogant mission. So what do you think? I mean, and it's false also. It's a lie. So what do you think these people protesting are actually protesting for? Is it just they don't want Donald Trump to do anything that he wants to do? Or do they actually like the idea of being the boss of the world?
Yeah, it's a great question. Obviously, I can't look into their heads. I can speculate, but I would imagine some of the people there are probably true believers, right? They actually believe that U.S. taxpayer money should be given to them and given to their allies because, of course, a lot of this money goes to non-governmental organizations upon which former USAID employees sit on the board or are actually collecting salaries. But some of them may be true believers in saying they're entitled to this and they know how to run the world. But I would argue that probably a lot of it has to do with this class of people that have said set up consultancies, part of these public-private partnerships that exist to try to fix the world. And the sad fact is it has not worked. It will not work because of the problems in the developing world are oftentimes deep cultural problems related to corruption and other matters. And pumping a lot of government money into those environments is not going to improve the situation at all. So there's a lot of self-interest here. International banks, Wall Street, they love USAID-backed projects because they're guaranteed. They love USAID and other government-backed loans that happen in the developing world because it minimizes risk. And these are the people that are ultimately going to be hurt by ending USAID.
Oh, yeah. Also, it's gender ideology training in Peru. I mean, the list is endless for how much the U.S. taxpayer dollars go to these ridiculous DEI programs around the world and all of this. And someone in our chat room here just made the point. Dana says, it's not USAID. We need to remember that because you're hearing that, of course, all over TV. It's USAID. It's not. They're not. I think that we shove that name in there and make it sound like it's friendly and sharing it. But talk about the CIA connections here, because Robert F. Kennedy kind of blew the lid on that, Peter, a few months ago on Tucker's show when he talked about USAID really being a front for the CIA, larger budget than the CIA, responsible for regime change operations like in Ukraine. How connected is the CIA here in USAID?
Yeah, well, the person in the chat room is quite right. It's not USAID. It's the U.S. Agency for International Development. Right. That is the official name, and it functions as supposedly developing in the developing world. And you're quite right that USAID is connected to the State Department. The State Department is kind of the preferred cover for CIA operatives operating overseas. They might be working in the embassy. They might not be in the embassy. They might be in an NGO, but USAID offers them the opportunity to carry out those policies, and it also gives them money, large sums of money. Back in the 1950s, before USAID, the CIA would have to take money out of its own coffers. It would have to get authorizations from the Intelligence Committee to spend $500 million somewhere. Now you can use aid dollars. So if you want to do something in, say, Botswana, you simply provide grants and support through NGOs to your preferred political candidate in that country. So that's how it works. So, eliminating it is, I think, a great solution. Greater transparency on our overall aid program overseas, I think, would be a great idea because there are others beyond USAID. And I think we need to have transparency not only to know what ends that money is being given, but what the results are, because these programs are rife with corruption, and we don't find out about them because of their sort of secretive nature.
But something that the Trump administration has indicated is that some of the leftovers that does not poof into the ether will be absorbed into the State Department. And we've seen signaling from Marco Rubio saying, look, we're staying in our own backyard. We're not going to go abroad and tell people how to think and how to live and try and regime change.
Do you believe him? Do we believe him?
I'm not sure I believe that, but I'm shocked to hear it out of a government official. And so could that be true, that we now honor the idea of a multipolar world, whereas live and let live, respect your neighbors and how they want to run their own countries, sovereignty, that kind of thing? Or is there some kind of fear that this ethos would be absorbed by the State Department and we'll keep doing things like this?
Or that Marco Rubio is a neocon and then his true colors will show. Well,
you've just led the witness.
At the end of the day.
Yeah, no, it's a good question. I mean, I don't know exactly what Marco Rubio is going to do. What I do know is this: the early signs from the Trump administration is that they're going to deal with the world in a very simple way. If you are our adversaries or our enemies, countries like Iran or China, you better be very afraid, because he's prepared to use military force if needed. That doesn't mean putting a bunch of boots on the ground, but using things like missile strikes. If you were Iran and you were going to damage the United United States, we're going to come after you. But what he's also showing is he's going to deal with American allies or ostensible friends differently as well. I mean, for decades, we have dealt with countries like Mexico and Colombia and Paraguay and Uruguay, for example, by saying, hey, we'll give you aid dollars, we'll give you lots of money, and then try to help us out if you can. That has not worked out well. All you have to do is look at a country like Mexico, which is effectively run by the drug cartels, which is the gateway for fentanyl in the United States. The Mexican government's known this since the fentanyl crisis began over a decade ago, and they've done nothing. And what Trump is essentially saying to them is, we're not going to try to bribe you anymore. We're going to use a different stick, and we are basically going to say, you don't have access to our market without a big tariff unless you start doing the stuff that we're telling you to do. And the reason is you should not take friends for granted. And countries like Mexico have taken the United States for granted. And Trump is going to change that, I think, by different tools. We're not going to throw money at you anymore. We are going to put tariffs on your goods and damage your economy if you don't cooperate. And I think that's a very good and healthy step in the right direction and away from the USAID model of effectively trying to bribe these people, and the bribery just doesn't work.
Yeah, I think we've had it with these NGOs. You're absolutely right. Peter Schweitzer has been our guest. I would encourage all of you to go wherever you buy books these days. He's got a fabulous library of fantastically written books. You can read Secret Empires about the hidden corruption there, extortion, is Clinton cash. I mean, you want to read about the corruption in Washington, D.C., look no further than Peter Schweitzer. Peter, great to see you. Thanks so much for coming on the show.
Hey, thanks so much for having me on.